Julie Martin's insistence on the fact that the artist didn't have to be restricted to a self-contained role, but have, quote, skills and abilities that could be put at the service of society, end of quote, is one of the core ideas that has guided our interest in organizing this symposium, and one that will undoubtedly be enriched by the conversations to take place in this room today and tomorrow. It is now my pleasure to welcome our first panelist to the stage for a conversation to be moderated by my colleague Martin Guinard. Thank you all for being here.
Hi, everyone. Oops, I'll just move. Yeah. So, of course, we're sad that Julie Martin cannot be with us, but it's so amazing that we had that testimony, and again, have to say how grateful we are to her generosity, notably by opening the world of her archives to us. So in this panel that is going to be on the creation and the running of E.A.T, maybe we can start with a quote from Robert Rauschenberg, who wrote in one of his notes in '67, asked the question, what would happen if artists and engineers started to work together to produce work that could not exist otherwise? That's actually a very good way to describe what E.A.T was trying to do. Because it's very rare in art history that you can find an initiative of such massive scale. When we talk about massive scales, in '67 there was already 300 artists and about 75 engineers that were registering as part of it, and it grew up only 3 years later to have something like 5,000 members at its peak in 1970. So, and yet this is not an institution, and that's going to be a very interesting point to explore. For a fact, Kluver writes in 666 to the engineers who had participated in 9 evenings, we are against making an institution. And that had a lot of consequences, and there I quote him again. This means that our headquarters will not take the form of a workshop or a laboratory. It will only serve as a trial place where things can be tested. That gives a very good way of understanding like the kind of energy that was going through E.A.T. So if it's not an institution, one might ask if it's a collective, and actually we will have people like Michel Quo, who will speak tomorrow about how E.A.T did this very interesting operation of namely transforming a collective into a network. And to talk about how you run such a network, how you operate into a network, which does come with an increased amount of complexity, it's our greatest pleasure here to be able to speak with art historian Christophe Leclercq, who will describe how E.A.T it doesn't have a single point of origin. It will, of course, be interesting as well to talk about the role of Robert Rauschenberg, who was, not the only artist, as we said, but had such an important role as a catalyst, and his presence and absence is very felt through E.A.T. And for that, we have the luck of having Francine Snyder with us, who's the director of archives and digital at the Rauschenberg Foundation, and we'll be able to dig in. So in the myriad of projects that there is, Nancy Perloff, who's curator of modern art and contemporary collections at the Getty Research Institute, will talk to us about maybe what we could call the cutest project by E.A.T, which is the Children and Communication project. So we're about to start with Nancy. Nancy, as I was just saying, you are curator of modern contemporary collections at the Getty Research Institute. You're trained as a musicologist and as an art historian. And you pursue scholarship on Russian and European modernism and on avant-garde composers such as John Cage and David Tudor. Your expertise in visual poetry and its sonic phenomena culminated in a monograph, Concrete Poetry, a 21st Century Anthology, that was published with Reaction Book in 2020. And you are also the curator of the exhibition Sensing the Future, Experiments in Arts and Technology, which was accompanied by a catalog co-edited with Michel Quo, who will be with us tomorrow. And exhibition that we all invite you to see in its second version at LUMA. So please welcome Nancy Perloff.
Strict timing.
Don't worry, no, I will manage the time.
Well, I need to see that's fine. Okay. Thank you so much, Martin, Simon, Vasilis. This has been, I want my time to show. This has been an incredible opportunity for all of us in different ways. And I just don't want to take too much time right now other than to thank the team at LUMA for a meticulous and creative and imaginative work that they did with the exhibition at the Getty Research Institute. The installations you'll see in the current show at LUMA, we did not have the space to do that. So take advantage of those parts of the show just to enjoy some of the very special opportunities. Hans Hacke, Lillian Schwartz, Wang Xing Tai. These are all quite unique and worth seeing. And worth seeing. So I just want to say that I'm thrilled the exhibition is up for a little bit longer, and I hope people go and see it, enjoy the Andy Warhol pillows, and all my thanks to the LUMA team. So I am going to speak about a particular project. Later, lesser-known project, part of this symposium theme, called Children and Communication. Decades before the internet, the E.A.T. project called Children and Communication used 1960s technology to help children communicate with each other. Let me step back a minute now for context and talk briefly about projects outside art, and we got an introduction from Julie Martin already. In the early 1970s, Billy Kluver and Robert Whitman turned increasingly to projects involving a multidisciplinary team that addressed issues of social concern. We've begun to talk about that. The first such project was entitled Projects Outside Art. And it was tasked with organizing an exhibition, and this is Robert Whitman and Rauschenberg's words, an exhibition of 5 realizable projects in the environment, that's important, to demonstrate the possibilities for society of the collaboration between artists, engineers, and scientists, end quote. Projects for this exhibition ranged from social issues such as education, health, housing, environmental control, food production. For Kluver and Whitman, projects outside art meant an extension of previous E.A.T. efforts to stretch the boundaries of technology. It was also an invitation to the contemporary artist to bring insight, intelligence, and energy to contribute to areas of society outside art. So this notion that artist projects could stimulate the engineer in new ways of looking at technology. After a spate of proposal vetting, 3 projects emerged as demonstration projects: city agriculture, children and communication, and recreation and play. On this slide, you see examples from the first, city agriculture. More specifically, city agriculture was a proposal for a closed environment, nutrient-feeding vegetable greenhouse, intended for installation atop the automation house, which was E.A.T.'s Upper Manhattan headquarters. What you see here are drawings, and I meant to say this at the very beginning. Everything you're seeing in this talk comes from the Experiments in Art and Technology archive. And this is a particularly beautiful point pen drawing on tracing paper. And the walls, these are environment control systems. The walls themselves are made of double skin inflated plastic sheeting with climate control. There was a feasibility study that took place in '71, and this project, City Agriculture, was supposed to be executed by E.A.T. in collaboration with the Environmental Research Laboratory at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And I will be honest in saying here, and we have many scholars and specialists who can help answer these questions, that I'm not aware of whether City Agriculture actually got installed. I know Nina Wexelbad is in the audience. There are others who can answer that question, but I just wanted to lay it out as an example of one of these socially minded projects that E.A.T. and help from really, a whole range of others developed as part of their lesser known but later important technical projects. Here we see children sending messages on the telewriter and facsimile equipment. So, children and communication was active from February through early April 1971, and there's a fascinating timeline in the E.A.T. archive that goes through weeks by weeks, just explaining where they were in terms of equipment for the children, made available, what was being used. I mean, it's very, very detailed for that period. So it's a relatively short period, but one that was very important. This was a project in which children ages 6 through 14 worked together. 2 E.A.T. staff members, Riddy Birchfield and Barry Kaplan, familiar names to people at all? Riddy Birchfield, maybe, yeah. They showed the children how to use the equipment. And then they left the children free to explore. Marcia Newfield, a fellow at Bell Labs and a student at the Institute for Developmental Studies at NYU, was invited to observe the children's activity. Children worked at one of 2 identical communications environments in Manhattan, one on the Upper West Side, the Automation House at 49 East 68th, and one in Lower Manhattan, the E.A.T. Loft at 9 East 16th Street. E.A.T. took as its responsibility to fill each environment with equipment. What you're looking at now is a progress report. So you can see the way it's moving. There's a lot of collecting of data and information and observation as this goes along. So here we have a progress report which begins by introducing projects outside art. The first quote, which I show you here, is useful for clarifying the artist's role more broadly. Quote, "Inherent in each of the projects is the belief that the artist is a positive force in perceiving how technology can be translated into new situations to better serve the needs of people and to provide variety and enrichment to life." So very important, it's called Projects Outside Art, but the artist continues to play a key role as indicated there. Another quote, also from this progress report, 1971, says that the 2 work environments afford new possibilities for putting children of different backgrounds and geographic locations in contact with each other in a way that is interesting to the children themselves. So I think that's actually a very interesting and result of the way children communication was set up. And from the pictures of the children, you get some sense of the diversity. This next slide is a document from the E.A.T. archive. This is one called Children's Communication Center. And here, the different technologies are identified. So if I pull out a couple of excerpts. It says, spaced around the perimeter of each environment are 10 telephones, 2 teleprinters, 2 facsimile machines, 2 telewriters. And then in finer print, there's an explanation of what each of those technologies or pieces of equipment do. Just as a couple of examples for you, the teleprinters allow for instantaneous two-way typewriter transmissions. The facsimile machines, using ordinary telephone connections, provide faithful black and white reproductions of printed, drawn, or photographed material. And if you study the E.A.T. archive, you'll find there are hundreds, possibly more, drawings that the children connected each other with, created for one another to observe. And sometimes they have text and sometimes they're, just independent. But that part is also really striking. Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm just about to conclude. So, the quote you see at the top, the excerpt says, the equipment area in each center is contained within an unusually shaped tent-like environment designed by artist Robert Whitman. The space is lighted from above by multicolored broad-beam spotlights. And my last slide really says it all in the picture. You can see the tent-like, or really tent, environment in which these children are working together with the technologies, and you can imagine colorful lights coming from above. So I just have a quote I want to end with, and then that'll be my close. In its democratic treatment of children who worked on site, responding to each other's drawings and writings through the application of new technologies, Children and Communication gave its young participants an early glimpse of the information age. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you, and it's quite beautiful to see the two examples that you take, like this sort of little, shell where people take a refuge to experiment with art and technology. And just as a note, I don't know what it's worth, but when Fujiko Nakaya came to visit the exhibition about the project of the roof garden, she told me that the aim was to give every New Yorker 1 tomato per. And then she couldn't remember if it was day, month, or year. So that remains in the unknown. But thank you so much. It's a pleasure now to discuss with Francine Snyder. Francine Snyder, who specializes in artist and museum archives, digital systems, and in fostering research and scholarship on contemporary cross-disciplinary creative practices. Since 2015, you serve as Director of Archives and Digital at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation. And you have been responsible for the Foundation archive with goal of increasing access and use of archival material. You have written and presented widely on archives and technology. This fall, your publication, I Don't Think About Being Great, selected writing by Robert Rauschenberg, published with the Foundation and Yale University Press, will be released, highlighting Rauschenberg's loves of words. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much. So I want to first thank LUMA for having this symposium. I want to thank the translators for putting my words into French so everyone can hear. And it was really great to see all the E.A.T. archives that are at the Getty. It's really fabulous for us to see. It's an honor to be in a room with so many E.A.T. experts, particularly because I am not an E.A.T. expert. So I'm really looking forward to learning from everyone that's here. I am an expert in Robert Rauschenberg, which is who I'm going to talk about today. How he was an artist that influenced the beginnings of E.A.T. We're going to talk very briefly about his art and technology works and how his love of collaboration and strong friendships and generosity to causes he cared about influenced the beginnings of E.A.T. Okay, so in 1966, Robert Rauschenberg was perfectly primed for a project like E.A.T. And to have an understanding of this, let's step back to 1964, the Venice Biennale, where he won the Golden Lion. And we see him here in the white suit next to Alan Solomon, who was a director. Buffalo 2 is next to us. This is an example of the works that were in the Venice Biennale. And this moved him into the international spotlight. And the anecdotes are is that this sort of startled him. He didn't realize what this honor was. And his response was to call his studio in New York and tell them to destroy all the silk screens so that he couldn't repeat his success. And this pushed him into performance, collaboration, and learning more about technology. However, this love for technology and performance and collaboration did start before the Venice Biennale. And here we have the origin story of Jean Tingley's Homage to New York in MoMA, New York Sculpture Garden. Rauschenberg participated in this. This is where he met Billy Kluver, and we see Tingley and Kluver and Rauschenberg there in the park. Here is Money Thrower. Tingley's HTNY, which was a rare survivor of this event. And then I also wanted to show at the same time he's doing Dry Cell, which is in the exhibition downstairs, a rare work where it absorbs sound rather than having sound come out of it. At this time, Rauschenberg was also participating in Judson Dance Theater. And this was a groundbreaking group of choreographers, visual artists and composers who were experimenting with everyday movements in traditional forms. And this is where his roots of collaboration, building relationships came in. Many of the participants from the Judson Dance Theater were involved in 9 Evenings. Steve Paxton, Yvonne Rayner, and there's one of her performances which Rauschenberg is in on the left. Julia Childs, Alex Hay, one of his performances is seen in the contact sheets, Deborah Hay, and Robert Whitman. Rauschenberg also began working more intensely with Billy Kluver, and one of the most ambitious technology works is Oracle. So ambitious that 2 of us are going to talk about it today. His notes show an interaction of collaboration, performance, and technology. I am not interested in doing this thing with a bunch of technical stuff dialing it up. It has to be a collaboration rather than an exploitation. Okay, so please be generous with the translations on this because it was done with technology. Here's Rauschenberg.
Oracle, the only major work Rauschenberg has shown in the past 2 years, is an ensemble of 5 pieces of mobile sculpture, one of them with a shower, all of them with radios controlled from a central console, each radio scanning the broadcast band independently. The result? A complicated collage of sound.
I also wanted the sense of a sound surface, the way the painting was. I asked Billy Kluver to help me with the sound once it got that large, because this wasn't anymore a matter of just taking a couple of portable radios and knocking off a few knobs and tying some strings and wires and things to control.
Okay, this combination of performance, collaboration, technology, and friendship was a perfect place for Rauschenberg to be with the creation of E.A.T. We skipped right over the press conference of 9 Evenings images, but that took place in his loft in 381 Lafayette Street, and you saw you saw Courtney speak about this earlier. He created and designed the poster. He attended rehearsals, and this is the technical rehearsal at Berkeley School Gymnasium. And he provided studio and experimental space for participants. And this is Steve Paxton in his studio experimenting with the plastics. Rauschenberg's work, Open Score, is also well documented in the exhibition downstairs. And here we see additional archival traces of the tennis match, as well as his thoughts on the final sequence and the infrared performance right here. Mass movements touch someone who is not touching you. And then this is where he's carrying Simone Forte in the bag and his notes on that. Rauschenberg participated by showing up every night, running errands and relaying messages when he was not busy directing Open Score or taking part in other pieces. His generosity in E.A.T. continued after it was established. In December 1966, there was a benefit event at Leo Castelli Gallery, and people paid money, donned an outfit that he fashioned consisting of a coat Kluver found at the Salvation Army. He had them put their foot in a sneaker, on a pillow, and photograph them as an artwork. And one of 75 is Billy Kluver over here. In June 1967, there was a giant model airplane benefit auction for E.A.T., and the exhibition took place in Rauschenberg's studio. And then in October 1967, the press conference at 381 Lafayette as well. This is a statement that we've seen in the exhibition and previously. Clouds were the theme. Rauschenberg silk-screened paper dresses to wear during the festivities. Julie Martin has said the dresses were made of paper, were seen as innovative in those days, so we too were part of the new technology. Can I go back? Yes. Anyways, before that, you saw some of his edits, and I just want to say as chairman and vice president, Rauschenberg also participated in administrative work. However, he continued to work in technology all throughout this. In a 1967 postcard from Billy Kluver checking on him, likely for the Revolver series, which we saw earlier. These were plexiglass discs with silkscreen images the viewer could spin. And here's a little...
The chassis has just been delivered from the fabricator. This is the first time Rauschenberg and his assistant have seen the 5 discs revolving.
Oh, God.
I really love that reaction to the technology working. In addition, Rauschenberg went on to complete 3 monumental technology works with engineers. Here we see Solstice, which was designed to exhibit in the Automation House, and we see the spot right there. And this is just a really quick illustration of how it works. Soundings, which is a responsive sound-activated installation, and this is actually on view right now at the Ludwig Museum in Cologne. And Mud Muse, a room-sized vat of mud that is bubbling with an internal feedback loop. So around 1970, Rauschenberg resigned from the E.A.T. board. He writes to Billy Kluver, I will continue my interest in your projects and can be less complicated about being your friend. So, friends they remained. I end this presentation with a photo of both of them in Rauschenberg's loft in 1989, and they did continue to collaborate on technology and works throughout their lifetime.
Thank you. Thank you, Francine. It's indeed quite amazing to see the reaction that Rauschenberg has with like those sliding doors that look uncannily like some works that you can see at LUMA, as Christophe were noticing by Carsten. There's one actually quote that I like a lot that Robert Rauschenberg said to Barbara Rose one day, which was like, Kluver gave me the suggestion that possibilities in technology were endless. Of course, it was right. Its possibility was like being handed a ghost bouquet of promises. And I think like you really gave us like a hint of this ghost bouquet of promises that technology was offering to him. Thank you. We now have the pleasure of listening to Christophe Leclercq, who's a teacher, a critic, and a researcher in contemporary art history. Christophe, your research focuses on social and environmental history of art, and more specifically on the life of artworks. You've worked on the conception and study of archives linked to contemporary creation, such as experimental art, in art and technology, to which you dedicated your doctoral thesis. And you collaborate with the Anarchive Association that is directed by Anne-Marie Duguay, notably on publication devoted to the artist Fujiko Nakaya, who was shown here at LUMA. You also directed the ERC AIM project, an inquiry into the modes of existence that was led by Bruno Latour from 2011 and 2015. And we had the immense pleasure of working together on the exhibition Reset Modernity that was at Karlsruhe ZKM 2016, where you also co-edited the catalog. Thank you, Christophe, for being here with us.
Thank you, Martin. It's working, yes. So Julie spoiled a bit of my presentation, but I will do it. Thank you, Julie. You may see us, and I miss you. Experiments in art and technology is not an easy organization to understand from an art history perspective. Its innovations, and in particular the use of new technologies, fostered a recognition of collaborative working methods that ran counter the glorification of individual artists, which was and remains prevalent in the contemporary art world. To this context, a further chronological difficulty, according to me, may be added. When did E.A.T. really begin? Various accounts may be given of its beginnings, depending on whether one refers to the official creation of E.A.T. that Julie was mentioning in '66, or to the development of its philosophy, its spirit, so to speak. A good while earlier. This question, among others, led me to create this E.A.T. datascape with my colleague Paul Girard and Daniele Guedo. Starting with multiple activities mentioned by Billy Kluver with Julie Martin in the story of E.A.T., the datascape was an attempt to better understand collaborations between artists and engineers through the study of the life of their collective work. So let us first consider the most widely recognized date, that of the official creation of the organization on September 26, 1966, in the context of the 9 Evenings Theater and Engineering Festival in New York. As Norma Lewin reminds us in her seminal thesis, yes, I will provide a few historical documents, I think, that are important to the history of E.A.T. This creation certainly responded to the necessity for a formal organization to bail out the debt from the 9 Evenings, but was also a reaction to a shared interest to further the kind of experimentation and dialogue some felt had begun to have something more developed from 9 Evenings. Quoting the lawyer Franklin Königsberg, who went to Albany to register the organization, Lewin writes, Königsberg recalled the group thought it a good name to defy bourgeois values. The story would seem to be more complex than Königsberg's recollection, however, so Julie told the story. Earlier in her thesis, Lewin notes that the choices of title for the 9 Evenings, Theater and Engineering, was the result of a desire not to refer to the event as art and technology. She quotes Kluver, the name came out of long arguments about what we were doing. The day art and technology was left behind was a day of relief for everyone. Curious, no? Kluver provides further details on the story behind the organization's name in his article, Working with Rauschenberg, a very interesting article. So you can read it with me. The origin of the name has its own story. We wanted something mundane, like Foundation for Artists and Engineers. When our lawyer, Frank Königsberg, came back from Albany, he informed the group that our preferences were either illegal or had been taken already, and that he had come up with and registered the name Experiments in Art and Technology. And that was that. Everybody, there must have been at least 20 of us, gasped at the word experiments, and we have the explanation. As we saw it, an artwork is either finished or it isn't, and the public should not be subjected to incomprehensible scientific or technical experiments. But anyway, the name has stuck. So why then do Kluver with Martin date the history of E.A.T. not to 66 but to 60 with Jean Tinguely's performance Homage to New York that you quickly presented and I will quickly present as well in their story of E.A.T. During this performance, a machine programmed to self-destruct in 27 minutes was presented in the garden of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. The machine was created in collaboration with the engineers Billy Kluver and Harold Hodge, with the help of the artist Robert Brea and the contribution of Robert Rauschenberg, you mentioned, the money thrower machine. And Rauschenberg was deeply impressed by the results. This performance, which is one of the most important of the 20th century in my mind, because it already evokes our consumer society and articulate chaos and order, programming and uncertainty in a way which will really be worked by Bob Rauschenberg. This work was featured extensively in the exhibition in E.A.T. in Seoul, for instance, and less here, as I see. Here are photographs from the exhibition in Seoul. And Kluver, who is not even mentioned in the description of Homage to New York in the current exhibition devoted to Pontus-Sultan, Jean Tinguely and Nikit Samphal at the Grand Palais, wrote a particularly detailed account of the MoMA performance, the garden party, which leads us to the conclusion that without the engineers, there could have been no machine of the complexity or on the scale of that displayed in 60. The origins of E.A.T. could therefore be found here too. Let us now turn to a third and final proposal, which I submit to you here. We might place E.A.T.'s true date of birth in the long collaboration between Rauschenberg and Kluver on the work entitled Oracle, presented by Francine. Now part of the French public collection at Centre Pompidou, I personally would have loved to see it in this exhibition, given the central place it has in E.A.T. ethos and oeuvre. It was originally conceived, created and exhibited as an interactive sound environment composed of 5 gifts from the streets, as Rauschenberg mentioned. And this work questioned the infiltration of technology in our daily life, and more specifically here, the relation between seeing and hearing, what the critic William Bergson described, for instance, as a laboratory for testing perception. It was this work, as described by Kluver, I will conclude, in his article Working with Rauschenberg, that convinced the 2 future co-founders of E.A.T. to propose to other artists and engineers the principle of a one-to-one collaboration, which might take various forms, naturally, precisely on the occasion of the 9 evenings we start with. This kind of collaboration recognizes a more active role played by the artists and the engineers alike in shaping the environment, which is a very core idea of this group, as you mentioned, Nancy. Of course, in this case, it would be necessary to refine, as I began to do in my doctoral thesis, the typology of the different ways artists and engineers are collaborating or working together, ranging from the simple communication of information or materials, in the case of Andy Warhol, I think, or to the delegation of action and the genuine collaboration that was both theorized and promoted by E.A.T. and exemplified by Rauschenberg and Kluver's collaborative work on Oracle, which led the former to invite the latter to co-sign the work, which he did, he did as a sound engineer, if I'm not wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophe. So as we know, the origins is a myth, and here you offer us a pluralization of when E.A.T. actually starts, which, and actually it's a very compulsive argument, the idea that like oracle might have been like an excellent way of describing how one of the very serious propositions for defining the beginning of E.A.T. I do appreciate that when you talk about the artists and engineers collaborating or working together, you put a little nuance there. And it gives me the wish to actually ask you a little bit, to the three of you actually, maybe more to Christophe and Nancy, like how did the collaboration got set into place in such a vast organization? But you need your mic.
I just. Okay, good.
And don't hesitate to give it.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, I do want to hear more from Christophe and Francine about this idea of collaboration. But one thing I found fascinating about children and communication, as relatively small a project as it was, the word collaborate is not used in any of the documents that I looked at. I mean, there may be instances. It's they're working together. They're not playing together. They're working together. And that seemed to me a very interesting omission that tells us a lot about this later period. One other quick point I wanted to make is that children and communication was not supposed to be like a school. They really did everything they could to generate working together with technologies, but it was not modeled after a school, and they emphasized that. But maybe you want to go back to the collaboration part. Yeah.
Busy, Christophe? I mean,
So you were asking how the...
no, but how did the process of collaboration work? And again, like it's so versatile. It's such a huge network, and you have sets of skills that are so diverse and hard to bring together around the table. So I'm asking, like, what were the ways, what were the methods, what were the dispositives that allowed to create those kinds of collaborations?
Maybe I can find a video on that, on this matching system. Can I have the image of... Attends. Attends, est-ce que je peux régler? It will come later, I think.
This is the great thing with an interactive
website,
is that...
No, it's just because I was interested in this matching system that Julie was talking about, and it has its own history as well. So it started with, if I'm not wrong, Suarnet and Fred Waldauer till '68. They were sending forms to engineers they could fill in, and then later on it changed with a second system with this edge-notched card, if I'm not wrong, the yellow one.
Can you describe a little bit that card system that we can see here?
As you can see, you have the name, if I'm not wrong, I have to turn on to see on my computer. You have specific field of technology that can be that correspond to one engineers, and then in this second and third system, which is the blue edge-notch card, they were using needles.
Still needles, yeah?
Yeah, needles to select the cards. So the positive answer are the cards that are staying on the table.
Oh, wow.
See?
Okay, so you could lift it up and like the other ones were like
yes.
pull down.
So you can combine two different criteria, not only one, of course.
Okay.
So one is, for instance, the technology that the artist is looking for, let's say radio. And the second information is about location. Are you close to New York? Are you living in New York or further? And this kind of information, you see? So it was... I like this system. I wrote an article on that because it's a combination of, I don't know, handmade system and already the beginning of the informatics.
Ancestor of the matching app, pretty much.
Maybe you can...
I mean, it also has an element of the ready-made in it because they're using knitting needles. Right.
Sorry, yeah, please.
Yeah, I would say it's an element of the ready-made, the element from Duchamp, because they're using knitting needles, so they're taking elements that they have there to kind of create this technology, and I love that.
Yeah, that's true, actually. I mean, because it was a lot about available technologies, but it was also a lot about creating technologies that had never been didn't exist before, and that's one of the great aspects of E.A.T. Actually, still talking about like that way it was organized, Francine. Like there was this very astute matching card system, but there was another person that was really like important in this matching system. That was Robert Rauschenberg. Can you talk to us a little bit about how did he involve himself? I mean, you know, like not only for his own artwork, but also for other artists coming to Bell Labs.
Yeah, I mean, Rauschenberg was an artist throughout his whole life that really was like collaboration was almost his middle name. And part of that reason it was so successful is because he had a respect for everybody that he worked with, and everybody had an equal part. And he really supported making sure that fellow creatives or engineers had the same sort of billing that he would have. He used his position to bring people up with him into his circle. So he wanted everybody involved in everything he was doing. And you could see that evidence with the Judson Dance Theater, bringing them into 9 evenings, bringing that performance in, making that just as important. And he did that throughout his career. He always wanted, he and Billy Kluver spoke throughout their lives. He continued to bring him in to ask him about technology and continued to support them in other ways. That photo of them at the very end was actually at a book signing for Billy Kluver's book. So, just sort of making sure that everybody was successful around him.
That's quite beautiful. But actually, like, there's one important piece where he shines by his absence. That is the Pepsi Pavilion in Osaka. And so why is that? Why did...
Well, we don't have exact evidence. He didn't...
we have a hypothesis.
He was busy. And that's the evidence that we saw in that letter where he resigned, and he resigned shortly after. So Julie has mentioned that he did attend a few of the first planning meetings, but 1970 is when he moved down to Captiva, Florida, changed where his studio was. He shifted into other modes of art making, and we can theorize that he just didn't have the time commitment that he needed to have something like that happen. He did, at the 1997 retrospective in Guggenheim Bilbao, bring some of that technology back, right? He had the fog, commissioned the fog outside of that. So he always kept that as part of his work, the connections, but I think he was busy.
Coming on this notion of, because we're talking about Rauschenberg, but of course there are so many. Christophe, you want to add something on that? Oui?
No, because we were discussing this quote we found.
Oui.
I don't know if I can show it, but I think it's important to.
Sure.
Where he said. It's an interview which happened later on. And what happened? Everything seems possible, asked Barbara Rose. And he answered, we frightened everyone. It wasn't economics. You are talking about a company that could be sued by the government for several billions of dollars and never even blink. It was fear of creation, insecurity about change. The whole thing just collapsed. People were suing Billy Kluver because of E.A.T, and I had to sell more paintings to keep Billy from going to jail. Something like 19 brand new patents that were direct results of events in 9 evenings of theater and engineering went to the credit of the engineers of the respective companies. For example, how I painted my shoes with the product that showed up, etc. And what he did for Soundix contributed to a cure for deafness that is almost perfect now, which is super interesting because we have a second example of, like Fujiko Nakaya's fog, of something which was developed in the field of art and which is then used outside art.
Outside art to become like that's actually very interesting. But although like I'm surprised by the gravitas of this quote. I mean, it's quite intense. That being said, Rauschenberg is of course very important in this project, but only one of the many artists that they are, contributors that they are. And actually, it's a question I'd like to ask to you, Nancy. Like, what's the notion of authorship? The way it got ventilated between artist and engineer, like, was the notion of authorship important, you think, in the project that you've studied? And you know, especially when you're looking at a project with young children in communication.
I think that's a wonderful question, actually, because 9 Evenings was clearly about authorship. There was no question about who the engineer was, and particularly who the artist was, but whether a dancer, a composer, a visual artist, we knew, and everybody there knew who had done what. However, when you get to the Pepsi Pavilion, it's not as clear. It's not broadcasted or communicated in such a strong way as for something like 9 Evenings. So there are composers and engineers working behind the scenes. But that doesn't mean those who attended the Pepsi Pavilion actually knew that David Tudor was responsible or another engineer was responsible. So this authorship thing, I think, is actually a fascinating question that would merit really a longer study. But certainly children in communication, in the documents that I've reviewed, I have not read a single reference to an individual child. This was Gehry, or this, I mean, there's no reference. It's all the children, and that's how it's written about. So it's a very good question for future work, I think, on E.A.T. Yeah.
Christophe, how would you answer to the question
No,
of
this
authorship?
question of authorship is really interesting because, as I mentioned, this idea of Rauschenberg to propose to Kluwer to co-sign the work, not as an artist. So you can co-sign a work and not be considered that the artist is signed as sound engineer is really interesting. And I think I was presenting my work in a seminar, and Frank Gehry, you know him, is really interested in this kind of social artistry, and he was saying, yes, why we don't have this kind of credits we have in the cinema. I see Verena, who knows what is cinema, so you have the director, you have the people in charge of the light, blah. Why don't we have this? The artist is the artist, no problem, but there's a list of people that are just embedded in the story. I don't know.
I mean, actually, I'm going to quote from memory here, but I think that Kluwer had a very interesting way of describing these collaborations, where he's saying that a true collaboration between artist and engineer could only develop when both sides understand each other. But in the meantime, attitude should be toward engineers working on the artist's initiatives and on his directions. On the one hand, we're not interested in artists, and there are many, who will comment something, do this for me, without interaction, back and forth of ideas between him and the engineer. The relationship must be constructive and inventive of both sides. That's a quite beautiful way, actually, to like feed into like this sort of in French we say générique, colophon ideas that you're printing. Credits, thank you. To the crediting. But which also like leads to like the elephant in the room sort of question, maybe to conclude, which is that E.A.T. gathers so many incredible figures, extremely like superstars. Rauschenberg, Warhol was not part of E.A.T., but he was so close to Kluwer. Famous, you know, like we can talk about Deborah Hay, about like a whole set of really well-known choreographers, and yet it seems to be a fairly, it's I wouldn't say an unknown movement, but it's almost like a movement that is in the footnotes of like major books as a side thing. How come do you think it didn't get like a more central piece of attention within the way we write, you know, about that period?
Well, I first want to say, I think a really great example of that was down in the exhibition where you saw the artist submissions, and it was Eva Hess and Capro and like all of these people that were there. Donald Judd, I think, was there. I mean, I think that is pretty fantastic. I don't have a good answer for that, but I would be curious on a theory that I'm going to throw out right now.
We like those theories there.
Yes, they can, yeah. I wonder if it's about the time. It's the idea of what technology was in the 60s. And if you look at art history and you look at when photography started, and it was sort of not seen as art. It was not seen as important, and it wasn't really talked about until you get much later in art history. And perhaps it's that technology is getting its own right in the theory of art history. Like it's finally coming into a place where it's discussed not just in small forums that are interested in technology, but integrated into art historical discourse as a whole. More so than, in the 60s it was seen as fringe, right?
So a difficulty to recognize
the importance.
Importance, but also like to
yeah.
name what was happening.
Yeah, and the importance outside of specialized audiences, the importance in general audiences, and it was panned at the time as well. So it wasn't seen as an event of importance at the time, right? It's only later historically that we're seeing that. So.
Do you want to propose another theory?
No, I think it's very interesting, and I think it helps us try to. I mean, it's puzzled me for a long time why so many fellow art historians, fellow musicologists, colleagues have never heard of E.A.T. It just always seems so surprising. But I would just argue, in part, it's because Billy Kluver used language in, maybe intentionally, maybe not, slippery ways. So if you try to investigate what projects outside art really means, it's not so easy. And similarly, if we go back to 1966, when we had the exhibitions, The Machine as Seen at the End of the Mechanical Age, and you also have some more beginnings, Billy Kluver wanted the awards to go to engineers. He didn't want those awards to go to artists per se. It was artists, but choosing engineers. So what I'm trying to argue is that there was a little bit of a slippery back and forth going on in the communication that Billy Kluver himself gave to the outside world, and that may have exacerbated or kind of enhanced this whole issue difficulty. Yeah.
Well, that's quite interesting. So, like, it would have pushed maybe more on the engineer side community than on the artistic one. And Christophe, as we need to conclude,
if I'm not wrong, the idea of giving the benefits to the engineer was because there were not enough engineers in E.A.T. collective, so they wanted to attract more engineers.
Yes.
I read that. So
that's
I don't know if it was a privilege. It was more a practical reason to attract more engineers. But what I would like to say, I mean, working on this topic for 20 years, I saw this kind of increase of interest. And I would say that now it's part of history. Maybe not, it's not taught in art school. I don't know, I'm doing that. But,
you're doing it.
But given the difficulty you mentioned,
5,000 members.
Collaboration, so you have two engineer artists, you are working with new kind of piece called environment, you don't even know how to name them. It's highly difficult to preserve them. So there's layers of difficulties, but you see MoMA and Pompidou, they just bought the 9 Evenings film. So I witness all this increase of interest, and now it's more and more known. And for me, according to me, now they are in art history, even if it's and the biggest difficulty, as a professor in art history, we love categories. So minimalist art, pop art, and as you said, during the 9 Evenings, John Giorno was behind the camera.
Yes.
Carl André was providing props for, and Robert Morris and Yvonne Rainer, Simon Forti
is in the burlap sack.
And actually, that's something that we'll be able to discuss about later on with the artist Carl Chang, who's here. This is especially interesting when you think that, there was a crisis of the objects in the 60s and the 70s. Artists wanted to be out of object that contained form, and Christophe, you've written extensively about these artists who try to create an environment rather than a contained, self-sustained structure, so-called autonomous structure. And so it's just very interesting that in E.A.T. that was doing so many takes, so many experiments on trying to get out of the objecthood in parallel to other movements that got the message easier, that it took, you know, like it took maybe more time to land. And it's interesting as well to see that very often that crisis of the object was connected to a certain Marxist critique, right, of being against like a consumption society or sort of fetishization of the commodity. That cannot really be argued for E.A.T. in the sense that it's as part of a huge corporation that has the means of like a big tech, a big science company, and therefore, like, you know, like that it takes on a very different tangent toward like that kind of crisis of the object. But it is gaining recognition, notably to the work that you're doing. And we want to thank you again for this wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time to take one or two questions from the audience. Does anybody want to ask a question? Yes, Val? Okay. Yes, you do. I'll bring it to you.
So about the crisis of the object, I'm just going to put it out here as I'm just thinking about it, that even those movements somehow managed to produce things that were collectible by museums, even, you know, despite the critique, Marxian or purely artistic as it may be. And so museums found a way to collect those objects, and therefore they became historicized earlier, whereas with the kind of works that E.A.T produced, that was much harder. You got like fragments and bits and pieces of non-functioning machines, but there was little that was actually collectible, and that contributed to the fact that it was harder for museums to historicize and contextualize those works. Yeah. A piece of the puzzle, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to add that the
sure.
E.A.T project, it just doesn't fit in that box, like that art historical box with all those things. It's a lot of remnants and pieces left. So I think that's a really great comment.
Super. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in 10 minutes to move forward with our evening. Again, thank you, Nancy, Christophe, Francine.